Hey everybody, Toby Rzepka here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about basic guitar care. This is for any wooden acoustic instrument, whether it's classical guitar like this or steel string guitar. We have here a 2020 guitar that I finished this spring that's going to be our model. This has a French polish finish, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is one of the more delicate finishes. It requires a little bit of extra care. First thing I want to mention about guitar care, any kind of wooden instrument, is humidity. That is by far the most important thing to keep an eye on. If you live somewhere where it gets very dry in the summer, like desert climates, or around here in New England, it's the winter where inside we have dry heat and can really lower the humidity inside a lot. And wood is like a sponge, so when the humidity goes up, it absorbs water, it swells. When the humidity goes down, it loses water and shrinks. And if wood is shrinking and it's attached, it's glued to the body of a guitar, like the soundboard, for example, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So in order to release that tension, it splits. So you get a lot of cracking from humidity changes. Best way to avoid that is either using a room humidifier, wherever your practice room is, or bedroom, or wherever you tend to practice. If it's a room with a door, you can just get a humidifier, keep that topped off. Usually they have a hygrometer to tell you what the humidity is. If you don't have that option, you can use a case humidifier. Those are things like this. This is made by Oasis. It's a little case humidifier that you just fill it up with water here, and you put this little T on it. This just fits between the middle strings right like that. So it actually humidifies the guitar from the inside, which I like a lot, and it kind of stays in place in the case, and moving it around, it's not going to knock around. So that's one. Another kind you can get, and you see these a lot, some of the cases like the Humicase cases come with these built in, just basically a piece of plastic with a sponge in it. You just run this under water, in the sink or whatever, and then you really want to make sure and just dry the outside of this off. Hold it upside down and just wait a few seconds to make sure there's no drips coming from it. You don't want water inside your instrument or anywhere on the finish for a long period of time. So that's another option. The other thing I wanted to cover right away is cleaning. Guitars get smudged, fingerprints, all that. So the first thing I start with, going sort of from the easiest to the more complicated, is just using a dry cloth. You can get a microfiber cloth if you want to. I just use like an old soft t-shirt, cotton is fine, and you can kind of just remove the fingerprints with a dry cloth. You can spray a little water on it if it's a little more stubborn. That's fine too. You don't want to get the guitar and have a lot of water standing on the guitar for a long period of time, but it's fine to get whether it's French polish or nitrocellulose lacquer or catalyzed polymer. You can get those wet. It's not going to ruin the finish. Just damp a little bit, and then obviously just make sure it's you dry it right off again. You can even use a teeny bit of dish soap as well for some oily fingerprints and things like that. There are also other polishing products that you can get that I use sometimes for a little bit more of a sheen. This is called preservation polish. It's made by Stuart McDonald, which is a guitar supply company. It's like a white paste that you can just rub on, and it kind of rubs off as you go. That'll leave like a nice kind of sheen on it. It's very safe for any finish. Similarly, this is a plastic cleaner called Novus 1, made for plastic but works on any finish and is very non-invasive. Just sprays on. So those are some options for keeping your guitar clean. Another thing I wanted to mention is temperature. You never want to leave your guitar in a very hot place. Typically this tends to be a hot car. Summertime, people leave their guitar in the case in a hot car, in the trunk, or even in the cabin. And that can really do a number on finish, especially, well, any finish, but especially lacquer can blister and bubble really badly with and discolor with heat. So generally, if you can keep it below 90 degrees, that's great. I mean, ideally, you in ideal circumstance, you'd have it be, 65 degrees or 70 degrees with a 45% humidity, but that's not always possible. We just try to keep it from being blisteringly hot, basically.
In our last lesson, we learned about time signatures, measures, and pickup notes. Today, we're going to add to our rhythmic toolkit and talk about dots and ties. So a tie is a curved line that joins two notes of the same pitch. But before we do that, let's break this down. We have a wonderful opportunity to review all of our previous lessons here. So here at the start, we have a treble clef, also known as a G clef, because this fun little tail right here tells us where G is located. We also have a time signature where the top number tells us how many beats are in a measure. And again, a measure is this pattern of strong and weak beats, and it's delineated with this little bar line right here. So here's a measure, here's a measure, here's a measure, and here's a measure. And the bottom number being a fraction, so it's over 4 here, so it's telling us that the quarter note gets the beat. And let's point to some note values here. So we start off with an open circle with a stem, so that's a half note, it gets 2 counts. Now I have a filled in circle with a stem, which is a quarter note, gets 1 count. And if I look to the end, I have an open circle here, that's right, whole note, it's gonna get 4 counts. And the last thing I want to bring back to your attention is our note names. So think way back to our first lesson when we discovered we had 7 different letters and 12 different pitches in our musical alphabet. We use the expression face fits in the space. So F, A, C, E. This note is an E right here. And the other mnemonic trick we used was every good boy, so we're on the 3rd line, that's going to be a B, and then the other ones does fine, just to finish our expression here. So you've learned a lot, that's pretty cool. So let's look at this tie now. So a tie joins 2 notes of the same pitch, so see how they're both an E here? When we play a tied note, we play the first note, but we let it ring for the duration of both notes. So both notes are quarter notes, so they each get 1 count. So in this scenario, I play E once and it rings for 2 counts. Okay, so you might be wondering why I didn't use a half note here instead. But if I use a half note, then I have to make this measure 5/4, and I have to make this measure a 3/4 measure, and it's just starting to get overly confusing. So we mainly use ties to connect notes over bar lines. So let's look at this example now. You'll remember from lesson 2 that these are eighth notes. So we count the first one as a number, and the second one that's beamed will be an and. So we count this 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The tie is covering where 3 should be. I'll point that out again. So here's 1 and 2 and the tie is covering 3. So all we're going to do is say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but leave the 3 only in your head. So we have 1 and 2 and 4 and. Now remember, 2 eighth notes equal 1 quarter note, so we could have written the same rhythm this way, where we have eighth, 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 quarter, and then followed by 3 eighth notes. But I think you'll agree it's much more confusing to look at. So the other reason that we use ties is to make a rhythm just look a little bit cleaner. Do you ever wish you could just count to 3, but all your friends only count to 1, 2, or 4? Then you need the incredible power of the dot. So let's go back to our rhythm tree here. Notice that a half note gets 2 quarter notes. When we add a dot to a note, we add 50% of that note value. So again, if a half note gets 2 quarter notes and I'm adding an additional 50%, I get 3 quarter notes. So if I don't use a dot, I have to use ties. And now that you understand what the dot does, I think you'll agree it looks a little bit clearer just to have the dot there. If we go back to our rhythm tree now, we can add a dot to any note value and get 3 of the next lower branch. So a dotted whole note is equal to 3 half notes, and a dotted half note is equal to 3 quarter notes, and a dotted quarter note is equal to 3 eighth notes. So let's close out with one more exercise. Okay, so let's put everything together now. So we notice that we're in 3/4, so each measure is going to add up to 3 quarter notes. So let's look at measure 1, and sure enough, we have 3 quarter notes. This is great. Our next note value is a dotted half note, which we now know half note equals 2 counts, and it adds 50%. So this one also adds up to 3. We're checked off. Now for my next measure, I'm going to count my first half note for 2 counts. So it's 1, 2. My next quarter note comes on beat 3, but notice we have our tie. So it's going to ring over the bar line into beat 1, because anytime we have a new bar line, we're starting back at 1. And we finish out with 2/8 notes. So we have 2 and. We always count the second eighth note with an and. And we close with a quarter note on beat 3. So let's count this together once, and then we'll play it with our guitar. Okay, so I'm going to count you in for a moment. 1 full measure of 3, and we start. 1, 2, go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 3, 2, and 3. And we'll do one more with our instrument this time. Ready? 1, 2, 3. 2, 3. 2, 1. And there you have it. You've learned so much about rhythmic notation. Thanks for spending your time with me, and I hope to see you soon.
I want to take the time to inform you that you're an artist. You make artistic decisions when performing music. And just like photographers and painters, you should have good reasoning behind your decisions. This process of making decisions backed by reasoning creates a compelling work. We talked about dynamics, so let's talk about timbre, or colors, on the guitar. 2 ways to get different colors on the guitar are to change where your right hand plays or how you attack the string. Let's start on where your right hand plays. I'll be playing a C major chord starting in our natural position right behind the sound hole, moving towards the bridge or ponticello. We're going to listen to the change in sound quality even though the chord isn't changing. How would you describe the quality of sound the more ponticello we got? What words would you use? I think I'd use clear, but kind of thin or tinier. Well, let's do the same thing, starting from natural position, going towards the fretboard. That's called tosto. How would you describe that sound? And by the way, we ended right above the fingerboard, and that's called sul tosto. I would describe it as a more rounder sound, a warmer sound. If I were to make an analogy, the difference between tosto and ponticello is, tosto is like portrait mode, and ponticello is more like sharp, high definition. Just because we're changing colors doesn't mean we have to change our contact point. You know what a contact point is, right? It's a fancy way of saying where your finger meets the string before you play. So, go back to our C major chord. To keep the same contact point and go tosto, I'm going to move my forearm up the bout. When I move my forearm up the bout, I don't have to change my wrist or hand positioning, and I keep my points of contact. If I want to play more ponticello, I move down the bout towards the ground with my forearm, keeping the same hand or wrist position. Start in your normal position and practice playing tosto, playing Ponticello and making the necessary adjustments. Pause the video now and practice. To get different colors of the guitar, you can also change how you attack the string or your contact point, because your contact point affects the timbre of the sound you're making. Okay, so my hand's set up and I'm just going to concentrate on my eye, finger, and getting different sounds by having different contact points. That's my regular contact point. That's more perpendicular / more nail. Can you hear the difference? The difference is very subtle when you're moving. Now you can do this and change where you're playing on the guitar. So here's a regular Ponticello sound. Here's a more perpendicular / nailier Ponticello. Has a little bit more bite to it. Try as I might, I can't get a much more fleshier sound by just my contact point, but that's not true with my thumb. Those are 3 distinct sounds that you get with your thumb, and you use them in totally different places. Like for a tango or a milonga. Or does this sound better? What about for a lullaby? Timbre is a great tool of the guitar and another dimension to add to your playing. The guitar is called a little orchestra because the number of different sounds we create rivals a symphonic experience, except it's not as loud. 3 artistic reasons why I change colors are to highlight something, create contrast, or match the mood. If you play a melody and it repeats itself, that might be a place to add contrast. In a tango, it might be nice to highlight the bass. In a lullaby, it might be best to just vibe and not wake up the baby. Just as I said in the beginning, you're an artist. You're making decisions about dynamics, color changes, all to craft your own interpretation. So I'll play a musical example, a short chord progression, and I'm going to play it in 2 ways. One where I'm doing nothing, one where I'm experimenting. Timbre is another one of guitarists' great tools for expression and interpretation. Happy practicing. And be sure to work on the skills and techniques needed to craft compelling musical experiences.
I have 6 short minutes to talk to you about practicing. Yeah, practicing. You kind of need to do it to get better at the guitar. And it doesn't have to always be a chore, really. Sometimes it will be. Some things just take a lot of work and a lot of perseverance. But there are ways that we can make things a little bit better for ourselves and more interesting. And I'm hoping that you're going to have some good tips to apply after listening to this short little video. So first of all, where do you practice? Well, if you're not sure or if it keeps changing, my recommendation to you is to find a nice quiet spot if you can find one where you won't be disturbed and where you have everything you need, a comfortable chair, any equipment that you're using, such as a music stand or footstool, have all of that in place. And then definitely eliminate distractions. Yeah, well, see, I have a notification. I'm distracted here. So you want to try to get rid of, either by putting your phone in another room if you have a phone, or putting it on airplane mode if you're using it as a tool for your practice. You just don't want to have those distractions get in the way. Focus can have such an impact on the quality of your practice. So try that out. Next, when do you practice? Well, you should try to practice every day, especially when you're starting out, because that you're really building new skills. And doing that frequently in small bursts is the best way to accomplish your goals. In fact, I just mentioned another important aspect of practice, setting goals. That can be really tough at first when you're brand new to something, but you want to definitely be clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish when you sit down to practice. And I don't mean just, I want to get better. Yeah, everyone wants to get better, but what do you really want to get better at? Do you want to get better at creating a beautiful sound? Do you want to play more legato, connecting your notes? Do you want your hand not to look like the claw every time you pick up the guitar? Those are all things to work on and to assess as you practice. All right, another thing that can help with your practice is to break things up. I mean, you're going to hear this from your teacher quite often, but you can break things up in a general way. For example, starting with warm-ups and doing that for a certain amount of time, then working on technique, and then working on your pieces, maybe 5 minutes on one, 5 minutes on another. That's a great way to help time just flow and to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. But when I talk about breaking things up, I'm talking about really breaking them up even within all of those categories. So for example, some fun ways that you could practice are to, let's say you're working on a technical exercise, to just work on the right hand. Just work on doing what you need to for the right hand. Just work on the left hand. You can even do that with your pieces. You could work on just clapping out a rhythm first or naming notes first. You can work on only playing the 3 hardest measures and trying to get them slowly, correctly, a certain number of times in a row, and then moving on to something else. I really feel like so much about practice is just about keeping yourself interested in what you're doing and noticing what you're accomplishing. So setting goals and then seeing that you're building your confidence and achieving them, that makes practice actually a lot of fun. Now, if you're not achieving those goals, that can be a little frustrating, but maybe it just means you need to try some different goals to maybe break things down a little bit more. For example, if you can't play the first line with a steady tempo, maybe you need to try it first at a slower tempo, or maybe you need to just try the first 2 measures or the first 3 measures and do that multiple times in a row, and then try the whole line. Really, if you can break things up appropriately, like in bits that are achievable, you're going to get better so much faster than if you just throw yourself into all the difficulty and kind of play through it in a messy way. I'm telling you, it'll help. That brings me to a point that I kind of just mentioned, but that is really important, and that is that it's slowing things down. Doing things very slowly for a portion of your practice can have such a huge impact on your ability. And it seems like it takes so long and can be like agonizing. It doesn't sound like music when you play something really slowly. But if you really pay attention to how it feels, to what it looks like, I'm telling you, you're going to learn so much about how to be a better guitarist all on your own. It's incredible how much that can help. And then before you know it, you will be playing it faster. And the metronome can be your friend. I mean, seriously, the metronome, cousin of the garden gnome. Yeah, really, the metronome, I used to not like the metronome, and now I've learned that it's a great way for me to kind of prove to myself that I'm getting better. So setting goals, setting tempo goals, setting goals for getting things correct a certain number of times, that's another great way to practice. And that can really build your confidence because you can see how much you're improving. But the time you put in the beginning, the quality of that time can have such an impact on your ability in the future. So practice well and happy guitar playing.
Platero es pequeño, peludo, suave, tan blando por fuera, que se diría todo de algodón, que no lleva huesos. Solo los espejos de tepache de sus ojos son duros, cuerdos escarabajos de cristal negro. Lo dejo suelto y se va al prado y acaricia tibiamente con su hocico rozando las apenas, las florecias rosas celestes igualas. Lo llamo dulcemente Platero. Y viene a mí con un tratecillo alegre que parece que se ríe. No sé lo que cascabeleo ideal. Come cuánto le doy. Le gustan las naranjas mandarinas, las uvas mosqueteles, todos de ámbar, los higos morrados, con su cristalina gotita de miel. Es tierno y hermoso igual que un niño, que una niña, pero fuerte y seco por dentro, como de piedra. Cuando paso sobre a los domingos por las últimas callejas del pueblo, los hombres del campo vestidos de limpio y desapaciosos se quedan mirándolo. Tiene acero. Sí, tiene acero. Acero y plata de luna al mismo tiempo.